Hello and welcome to The Real 50 Over 50. As you can see, I am not the real Donna Cravata. She's off this week, but she will be back next week. I'm Stephanie Dalfonzo, very happy to be sitting in for her today with our special guest, Sherry VanAntwerp. And hello, Sherry. Let
Hello,
me
hello,
just
Stephanie.
touch on this real briefly because I'd really much rather hear from your voice. But as I know it, you're a transformational speaker and intuitive clarity guide, which I'd love to hear more about that. Inspires Gen X women to create their own aligned, fulfilling lives. Ooh, sounds interesting, Sherry. So tell me, flesh it out a little bit more. There was a whole bunch in your bio, but I think people would much rather hear from you than me about you.
Well, I'm really happy to be here today. So sometimes people ask, what is this intuitive clarity guide? And really, that for me stems back into, what are women looking for today? And I kind of found that, even prior to turning 50, but especially after turning 50, I felt like the question that kept coming up for me and actually to me from clients was this desire for clarity. What are the next steps? What should I be doing with these next 30 plus years of my life that we have out there? And I've always been a very intuitive person, which goes back into a lot of stories even from
So
childhood.
can I
Yeah.
interrupt for just a second? Because I am right there with intuitive, but I think some people are really not sure when you're talking about intuitive and intuition. What does that mean?
Yeah. For me, it really means when I'm working with someone, I'm using the skills that I have in terms of connecting with your guides, your angels, and helping kind of be the conduit for that message that you need to have, helping you gain that clarity. I've always really kind of been a channel, and that's a very interesting thing to kind of try to develop over your life, because channeling can be tricky in terms of learning to trust what is really being given to you versus that feeling of well, can't everybody do this? This is what is always in my head, and this is what's happening. And then I quickly learned as I started working with some mentors and stuff that no, that's not how everybody's actual brain works, and that's not how everybody is receiving information. So I feel like it's kind of my privilege in many ways to be able to be that kind of conduit for people to help them get that clarity that I truly do believe we all can access in some way. But some people just are a little bit more open and able to do that and to receive that.
So is that something that, as a child, you started figuring out, wait, I'm getting this information, or was that apparently as you entered your 30s, that was quite a big time for you as well? Tell me, how that evolved for you.
Yeah, it was one of these things, I didn't really become aware of that. I kind of knew it, but I didn't know what to call it, right? It was just a thing until I was probably about 40. So I'm 54 now, so probably in about the last 15 years or so. But I have times and things that happened when I was a child that now when I think back about them, I'm like, that's very interesting. When I was in kindergarten, I remember one day the teacher telling me oh, your mom's going to be picking you up from school today, which I usually rode the bus home. And in my head, I'm like, yeah, I know, we're going to my grandparents' house in Wisconsin. And that's what happened. I mean, and it was very unusual because, mind you, this is back in 1974. People just didn't go and drive and take these trips willy-nilly back then. It was, much more planned out and everything. And then there was another incident that happened with something with my dad a few years later. And he'd been in an accident, and my mom picked me up. And before she even told me, I'm like, yeah, he was in an accident. And so I had these little things that were always happening throughout my life that were kind of these little indicators of, that's interesting, that's curious, but I never really knew what to call it until much later in life. Yeah.
And how did you figure out what to call it and how to harness the gift of this?
Yeah, I really got interested in just kind of doing a lot of self study and self work. And I first came across Wayne Dyer, actually,
Mm.
and was at a Hay House event, which he was speaking at. And that's really kind of what sparked the whole journey for me, was starting to read some of his material and listening to him speak. And it just really opened up so many doors. I remember the first book of his that I read, I was actually sitting on a plane reading it. And it was just kind of like, oh my gosh, this is like my life. This is answering so many questions. And I, again, just had no idea that this was something that other people experienced, or that it was different from other people in some way. So, you
So
know,
I'm curious. And two questions I'm curious about is around age wise. When was that you got had this awakening, and also was this like the beginning of you opening up a whole new chapter as far as entrepreneurial? What you're going to be doing.
yeah, yes to all of that. Yeah. I was probably approaching 40, or right around at 40. And most of my professional career was spent in consulting and in higher education. Actually, I worked most of my career in fundraising and development, and worked then with a lot of colleges and universities, consulting with them on that. So it was a great, great experience. I mean, I met so many wonderful people, and it really was, a people business, as they say. But it also was getting to the point where I'm like, man, I can't keep up this pace. My kids were getting to be, junior high and getting ready for high school, and I was like, I can't keep getting on a plane all the time. And I was really, in doing that work for a couple of years, getting to this place of like, I don't think this is my path, and I don't think is what I'm supposed to be doing. And I was very ready to leave that career path and go out in my own entrepreneurial way. But this was a great test, right? Because that sounded great, but I was making really good money. I was like, I'm
Mm.
making really good money here. I had a lot of control over my schedule, other than this having to get on a plane and everything. And my husband at the time kind of kept saying, like, just hang in there, just hang in there. He didn't really want me to bail out. And then I had what I called my, shot over the bow, so to speak. So I have quite a long family history of breast cancer and things like that. And I got my first like callback after a mammogram, like, we want you to come in, and
Mm.
all of that. Anyone who a lot of people have experienced that. And that's kind of a really rough phase. And so I had to go back for that callback and everything. And I just, again, now knowing more about listening to your intuition, listening to the voices and everything, I told him, I'm like, this is my signal of like, you have to make a change. Like, everything turned out okay from that and stuff. But I really felt like that was my total, like, wake up, Sherry. Like, that you don't want to be here. You're dragging your feet. So let's give you a little glimpse of like how delicate life can be, and you better get on track, and you better get on focus. So it literally was um like within a month after I got that all clear and everything, that I gave my resignation and I said, I'm out, I'm done. And I moved into the wild world of being an entrepreneur. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So, what could you give a little piece of advice if there's somebody who's watching or listening who gets that call back and they're in a job where, it sounds like it was a job you enjoyed, you were getting paid well, and you took a leap. So, if
Yeah.
somebody is in a position where or a job they don't, and they have that that callback or something similar to that. What's one little piece of advice? Like, what's the first thing you would suggest that they do?
Yeah. I think the first thing, I'm not saying that what I did is right for everyone. I knew it was right for me. But I really think the first thing that you have to do is to get through that process first, right? Like I had to get through that. I didn't like get the call back and the next day be like, I'm done, I'm out. Like,
Oh, right.
right. Like, don't pull all the triggers at the same time, right? So you have to move through that. But then really, again, if you were feeling like that there was something that you were hesitating on doing, for me, what that meant, what that signified to me was like, stop hesitating, like do it now. And really sit with, what is there something that you've been wrestling with? Is there something that you've been grappling with that you have been hesitating on? And if this feels like this is kind of like, again, for me, it felt like, here's the shot across the bow, like we're giving you a warning shot here. It's time to go. It's time to take action. For me, that was the symbolism and everything that I took away from that. So if you feel like there's something similar in your life that you're just hesitating on, maybe sit and think like, what am I waiting on? Why am I waiting? It's time. It's the time is now. And I think that's really, for most people, the hardest part, right? Is taking that first step into action and really getting momentum going.
Well, sure, because that was a big leap you took.
Yeah.
And it sounds like do you have you talked about your first husband, so you're married again?
Yes.
Okay, so your first husband, was he the one who was with you were with your first husband at this point where you got the wake up call?
Yeah, no, I was with my second husband.
Okay.
So my first husband and I have been apart for a number of years. He's the father of my kids, though. But no, it was my second husband, and he is he's much more open and everything, in terms of like spirituality and everything too. But he's also like kind of that conservative guy of like, if everything's good, like why shake it up, and I was like, oh no, baby, it's time to shake things up here. Yeah.
Yeah. So you focus on working with Gen X women, and I literally had to go and do a Google search, like, what ages are Gen X? Because I'm confused about all these different the different things. So what's the age range for
Yeah,
Gen
so
X
I
women?
think Gen X is officially, I think it's like if you were born between like 1964, 65, and like about 1980. I think that's the general parameters that they lay out there for Gen X. And it's very interesting right now because, they're really wanting to kind of either forget about us, that we exist, because we are actually one of the smallest generations. We're sandwiched by the boomers and the millennials, and so we're actually the small demographic in comparison. And it's fascinating. Like a lot of times I've seen graphics where they're talking about generations, and they'll talk about the boomers, they'll talk about the millennials, they'll talk about the Z's, and they don't even put Gen X on the board. It's like we vanished, like we didn't even exist and everything. And more commonly, they'll just want to lop us into the boomers, right? And make us all one giant generation, which my mom is a boomer, but I am not a boomer. So I feel like Gen X is this very, very, oftentimes, again, like forgotten demographic, but we are also a demographic, especially of women, that were put in a very unique situation. Um, our moms, for a lot of us, they wanted more for us because our mothers, as the boomers, were still kind of relegated in many ways to, you could be a teacher, a nurse, or a secretary. Those were still kind of, for a lot of boomers, the given career paths that they could take. And so a lot of them wanted more for us. So we were the generation that we went to college in large numbers, because that fight had been fought for us already by the boomers, so we could go to college. So we went to college, and we were told, like, you can have it all. I don't know if you remember the Anjali commercial
I
from back.
do. I do.
Yeah, if you don't know it, if you're watching, if you don't know it, just go to YouTube, Anjali, Enjoli. And it was this commercial about, I can bring home the bacon fried up in a pan, and never, never let you forget you're a man because I'm a woman. And it was like basically this woman that, like, yeah, she can have a career, she can be a wife, she can have the kids, like she can do it all. And that was the message really that Gen Xers were sold, is you can have it all. I can't tell you how many times I heard that. Like, you can have it all. You don't have to choose being a mom or being a career person, because you can do it both. And so we did, right? A lot of us went out there and we did it both. And what resulted is we're one of the generations that's the most medicated of all time, because we were stressed out, we had anxiety, we had depression, because we were doing all the things, but we felt like we weren't doing anything great, right? We were being an okay mom, we were being an okay wife, we were being an okay employee, because we were spread in every direction. Because again, we were told, like, you can do all these things. And it was happening at a time where, like, there was no maternity standard policy, like FMLA wasn't a thing. With my first child, I took 5.5 weeks of maternity time, which wasn't even paid, and so we were being, and then like nursing and stuff like that. I mean, I remember I used to have to go and I would sit in a bathroom stall, right? Like after I went back to work to pump and everything, because there weren't like nursing rooms. There was just nothing. It was the Wild West, out there in terms of, being a working mom and everything. And it was also a time where there was a lot of judgment amongst women, about, like, if you were a working mom, there was judgment on you of like, well, then why did you even have kids? And then the reverse, if you decided to stay at home, it was like, well, why did you go to college? I mean, there was just a lot of infighting, even amongst women at that time, about like what was the right, path. And there was no support really for what we were trying to do. The definite burden still of, raising kids, getting daycare, taking care of the home was still squarely falling into the laps of women, because it was really kind of this transitional phase, so it's a group of people that I have just great compassion for, because I understand the struggle, right? And then now we're entering into this phase of, post 50 and midlife and menopause and all the things, and now we've gotten to this place where we're like, I have a lot of my life left. They keep saying, like, our 50 isn't the 50 before us. And it is true. So we're kind of looking at, how do we make the most out of this next phase of our life? And we've been sold one, we were sold one lie, right? And I think now we're like, no, I'm going to do this on my terms. But what does that even look like? We don't
exactly. What does that look like?
Yeah.
So really, what does that look like? What are Gen X women facing now? What are some of those really big challenges? And what words of wisdom can you, impart to give somebody, oh, okay, take the next smallest step?
Yeah. I think, some of the big things that we face, again, we are kind of that sandwich generation. And we face some unique challenges in terms of, our parents now are aging, and that looks a whole lot different too than the generation before that, even. That generation, they have different views and everything on what they want that ending chapter of their lives to look like, and the amount of independence and everything that they want. So we're dealing with that. But then a lot of us are facing this period too, where, our children are sometimes not as able to be as independent as what we would like, because they're facing, high cost of living, the whole like grown and flown, but then coming back into the nest, and what that looks like and the challenges that can present. Because I think it becomes a phase for a lot of people where there can be some resentment, I think, that sets in, because it's like, okay, this was supposed to be my time. And now I've got all these other things that I'm still dealing with that I didn't expect to be dealing with. So how do you begin to carve out, what you truly want? And a lot of that has to start with, releasing that, not expectation really, but releasing that feeling of, we got to solve everybody's problems, right? Like, we don't have to solve everyone's problems. Like, other people are capable of solving their own problems. We maybe need to be there to help be kind of that safety net, if you will, but we don't have to solve their problems for them.
That right there, that's the nugget, is we don't have to solve everyone else's problems. And
Yeah.
it ties back into the commercial that you were talking about, because we kind of had that pressure, don't you think? We were given that pressure that it was all on us, that, yeah, we can do it all. So we have to solve everybody else's problems.
Yeah.
And it's a little tough. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it's very interesting too, in terms of like how that ties back, especially to our relationships with our kids and everything, who are now becoming more independent for a lot of us and everything. Because we were that generation too, where, the joke is that we were feral, right? Right, yourself. Like, we were the latchkey kids, right? Yep. And it's true, like, we were coming home from school and there was an empty house, and it was Hot Pockets in the microwave or whatever. And I remember, my parents divorced when I was 12. And I've had this conversation with my mom, because that first summer I was 12 and my brother was 9, and we were home on our own for the summer, and she was working and everything. But I think about that now, of course, it's a much different world now than it was then too. But we kind of, raised ourselves. There was no, parents didn't come to like every event and every game, and there was not that level of involvement. So I think then a lot of times we as parents kind of went the other way, and we are very involved in everything, which is all great too. But we do kind of then sometimes have difficulty, I think, separating when they become actual adults, of being in that position of saying like, okay, now I need to step back, and they need to solve their own problems, and they need to figure things out. And I can be there as that kind of safety net, but I don't have to solve everything for them.
But it's a tough transition though, isn't it? And, you're talking about always being there for the kids. And I was like, in my mind, hearing the whoosh of helicopters, of helicopter moms.
Yeah.
And to go from that to, oh, okay, now you're on your own, and I'm here for backup. That's a tough transition.
Oh, yeah,
so
for sure.
What little nuggets can you share for somebody who may have been? And, I will say I was probably a helicopter mom. Thankfully, my kids are grown and flown and doing fine, but it is a tough transition. So what would you say to somebody who's listening thinking, oh, that's me?
Yeah. I think the biggest thing that I remind myself of a lot of times, because I don't think I was a helicopter mom. Maybe I don't think my kids would say that. I was involved, right? I was active and everything. But what I come back to a lot of times now is because it's very hard sometimes to remember that your kids are adults. Like, my kids are almost 26 and almost 29, so they're adults. They're full on adults and everything. So a lot of times I will step back and say, Sherry, think about when you were that age. What were you doing? What was going on? What decisions and everything were you making? To give myself that perspective of like, yeah, at 26, I had a baby already, so I fully, I was adulting full on hardcore. So yes, of course, my kids are going to be adulting, and I wasn't checking in with my mom and asking all these questions. And so they're not going to be either. And like, that's okay. Like, you want them to to grow and you want them to learn. And a lot of times the only way that happens, even though we'd like to spare them, we think that I want to spare you the pain, or I want to spare you the suffering. Like, it's all part of their journey as well. It's all part of their growth process.
Mhm.
And, sometimes sparing people that pain doesn't really help them. It sometimes only puts more stress on you, and they may need that in some capacity for their own journey and their own growth too. So you have to be willing to step back, remember what you were doing, and let them do that too. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not always easy though, right? It's
No.
like, gripping the steering wheel and
Yeah.
then, okay, now you're adults and now I have to let go. Wait, how do I do that?
Yeah, it is hard, and it's definitely a process, and it's one that I'm constantly doing that too, reminding myself of it is their life and it's their decisions and their choices. And I have to do that too on the other side too, with talking about, the aging parents and everything. Like, it's their life. They have to make their choices. I don't have to make the decisions for everyone.
But again, that is so tough when it is that sandwich generation of feel the responsibility to your parents, feel the responsibility to your kids, and then what about me? Yeah.
Right, exactly. And that's where I think it's really important, is to really take that step back and remind yourself that you do have to make yourself a priority, because you don't want to have those regrets, down the road. You don't want to hold any resentment towards anyone or anything that kept you from living the really true life that you want.
Mm.
So if you feel like you're having some of that, it's really time to kind of just take a step back and reevaluate, you know, what you what you feel like are your priorities versus maybe what you need to make your priorities.
And that's where someone like you steps in to help sift through that all, right?
Yes, yes, having that distance and perspective can be helpful sometimes.
Yes, it can. Sherry, how do people get in touch with you? And what is your final parting wisdom nugget that you want to share?
Yeah. Well, people can find me. I am on Instagram at _Gen X_whisperer. That's kind of a funny little title, because sometimes I say the quiet parts out loud. I like to have fun. I like to have a good time too. So that's one of the things I think people would say in working with me too. Like, we get things done, but we have a lot of fun and some laughs, because we can't take things too seriously sometimes. So
Right.
you can find me on Instagram. I also have a website, just sherryvanantwerp.com, that you can find me at as well. And I think my parting piece of advice for people would be, let go of the small stuff. Again, kind of like, don't
Mm.
sweat the small stuff, but really, 90% of the things that we worry about never happen. So how can we start to focus on the things that really truly do matter and will make a difference for your life?
Very nice. Very nice. Thank you so much, Sherry. Thanks for going with the flow with us. Donna will be back next week for the real 50 over 50 with Hillary Silver, who is a clinical psychotherapist turned master coach, mentor, and advisor. Thank you so much, Sherry. And Donna will be back next week.